The 2022 real estate collapse is going to be worse than the 2008 one, and nobody knows about it. Time to Call Your Mom by CatBulliesdog. There's going to be a lot of text here, so all you smooth brain apes who are on Reddit, a text-based website, yet are still too retarded to read, can skip to the end where there will be a very short summary, a bottle of milk from your mother, and a blankie. First, let's talk about the part of the real estate market that's going to go bust that everyone knows about, or at least the people who pay attention to this shit or read my previous DDs know about. This is the commercial mortgage-backed securities market. These are loans on commercial buildings that have been securitized, bundled, and sold to investors. The following is an explanation of the CMBS issues I wrote for another DD over 6 months ago. The CMBS, Commercial Mortgage-Backed Securities Bomb. This one is a bit different from the mess we had in 2008 with MBS, mortgage-backed securities, because it's a different market with different rules and it's a smaller total market than MBS. That said, the problems here might actually be worse. There is a company called Ladder Capital, formed out of the remnants of Bear Stearns' bond department, that has struck an unusual deal with Dollar Store, and they have a lot of properties that are very much coasting on made-up mortgages. I could easily write like 3 paragraphs on this one partnership alone, but I'll just summarize instead and say that these people learned absolutely nothing from 2008 except that it was a profitable scam that carried no jail time. To understand just how bad the CMBS mess is, you need to understand how CMBSs work. At first glance, they're similar to regular MBS. It's a bundle of tens of hundreds of mortgages for commercial properties. They're divided into tranches, usually 6, and the lowest tranches pay out the highest yields but also fail first. And now things get a little complex, so I'm going to simplify like crazy here, but this is the most important part to understand why this is all going to blow up. A commercial building is an income-generating property. Its market value is derived from how much income it generates. The bank lending you the money will want you to put up some amount of collateral for the loan. If rent goes up, the amount of collateral you have to post goes down. If rent goes down, the amount of collateral you have to post goes up. Now, the weird thing about CMBS loans is that if only half of your building is rented, you can just pay half your mortgage and whatever you owe for the other half of the building just gets added to the end of the loan. Now, say you can't rent out the empty half of the building and you want to renegotiate the terms of your loan rather than just keep adding debt to the back of your loan. Well, this is where the CMBS comes into play, because all of those different tranches, the investors behind them have different incentives. The guys at the lowest tranches don't want you to modify the loan because that means losses, and they take those losses first, while the guys in the highest tranche want to modify the loan because it generates more income for them and they're not eating any losses. Unfortunately for you, in most CMBS agreements, you need a supermajority of 70 to 80% of the votes to get a loan modification. So to lower rents to market rates and get the building rented out, since you can't get a loan modification, you, the landlord, have to write a check to the bank to make up the difference between the value of the building at the old higher rental rate and the value of the building at the new lower rate. Or you can just do nothing, get an extra write-off on your taxes, and hope some sucker comes in and rents at the higher price, or a different sucker comes along and buys the place from you, making it their problem. This is why you'll see so many empty storefronts with ridiculous asking prices that the landlords won't budge on. It's because it can't. I really skimmed just the teeniest top of the surface on this subject, but basically, all those CMBS notes that are super toxic start coming due in March 2022, and they're going to absolutely detonate the commercial property market. Many banks and investment groups will be destroyed when these go bad, just like 2008. This is a video from a guy who just walked around downtown New York City showing all of the empty stores and how the place basically looks like a dead mall now. Time frame, March 2022. Well, I said March 2022 was when these shit CMBS notes were going to start detonating / causing problems. Let's check, shall we? You see that little spike at the end of the head and shoulders before it dives to all new time lows? Yeah. That's the last day of February 2022. Okay, So that's a third of the US real estate market. What about the 2/3 of the market that's residential? Well, this is where things get weird, and how everyone, including me, kept missing it. I've written before about these issues with the US housing market. Housing units relative to population has actually increased over the last decade plus, while home ownership rates have dropped and prices have skyrocketed. Everyone who looks at the residential market thinks that it's going to be bought by residents and all the people buying today are actually qualified buyers with good credit scores and jobs and such. And that is true for all the people buying houses. There's not a repeat of the 2008 subprime debacle with ninja loans. No income, no job, no assets. What is new, and whenever you get a financial crisis, it's always driven in large by a new type of financial instrument. Read debt. Is the sheer number of homes being bought up by cash, and it's inferred that all these institutions and foreigners, for example, about $90 billion in US real estate was bought by foreigners in 2021. Wall Street, however, blew that away, hitting as high as 1 in 7 of all homes and 1 in 2 of all apartments. Now, people look at the record institutional/foreigner buying and think it's an explanation. But the truth is, even with these crazy numbers, 6 in 7 homes and 1 in 2 apartments are still being bought by regular people, often again with cash. These purchases are frequently referred to as cash buys because the buyer just pays the seller cash. However, they don't actually have piles of cash lying around in freighters to pay for the stuff. They take out loans. Specifically, they take out loans on their equity assets. Now, this is where it starts getting sticky because institutions are not buying these houses and apartments as residences. They're buying them as income-generating properties. In traditional home mortgage loans, there are 2 things assessed: the value of the house, which acts as collateral for the loan, and the borrower's ability to pay back said loan via wages or assets. It's relatively simple 2-factor risk analysis. Now, let's look what risks the Wall Street-owned rental homes are subject to. Income-generated rental rates, housing values, stock/derivative values, interest rates, urban planning, crime rates, and overall market returns. So basically, money being loaned is getting assessed on a 1-factor risk analysis. Value of assets under management, AUM, of the borrower. But then that money is getting used to buy a whole bunch of houses/apartments, and all of a sudden it's subject to a whole horde of other risks. And the original risk profile is more useless than you are with your compensated evening companionship after a couple of drinks. There's one other thing I haven't mentioned yet, and the reason Wall Street never really messed around with buying up everyone's house before the 2008 crash. And it's a big one: liquidity. More specifically, liquidity of assets. Liquidity of assets. What mean? Glad you asked, Tard. Liquidity of assets, LOA, basically means how easy or how hard it is to sell an asset. Now, one of the reasons Wall Street hedge funds and investment banks can do things like leverage up to 37.5 to 1, the theoretical max level they use, or say 200 to 1, the level Goldman is at according to the last 13F filing I read, is because the money is being backed by securities and derivatives and other financial instruments which are extremely illiquid. So if things go tits up like the Titanic, the lender can force a sell-off of this stuff very quickly to get their money back.
No! God, please, no! 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 No!
Now, in reality, this isn't true. Or Credit Suisse and Nomura wouldn't still be dragging around Archegos bags from last year. And Bill Huang couldn't have pulled a Reddit meme and avoided margin calls by not answering the phone. Yeah, that really actually in real life happened, but in theory, it is. Now, housing is illiquid as fuck. It takes a lot of time and effort to sell a house, or to buy one for that matter. There are special rules and whatnot from the federal government about what kind of collateral and stuff you need for a residential house. 2008 was so bad because the banks basically ignored all of those.
Wait a minute! Who are you?
After 2008, One of the few things the government sort of did fix was tightening up lending standards for retail, regular people. So everyone who's looking at the last crash sees that retail borrowers aren't over-leveraged with bad loans in a subprime and thinks it can't happen again. But all those rules and whatnot get ignored if the buyer's paying cash. This is the financial equivalent of the military expression, generals always fight the last war. Massive use of margin/equity-backed loans by both retail and institutions to buy property has taken two separate markets: the liquid/volatile equity market and the illiquid/stable housing market, and stitched them together like a human centipede with dog shit wrapped in cat shit debt passed back and forth into one market that is unequally liquid and extremely price volatile. If you need proof that this is what's happening, let me help you out with some charts that illustrate my point. This is US margin debt over the last few years.
Wait till you see the... No.
Bruh.
Now let's compare it to the US home prices over the same period. So basically, we've got loans on inflated assets fueling loans on other inflated assets. This is a feedback loop that goes parabolic, then crashes hard. You can see the margin debt coming down and forming the first valley before it goes back up a little to complete the head and shoulders pattern, then drills down into the center of the earth because housing is a liquid. It's going to lag that drop, but as you can see from the price curve leveling off, it's getting ready to do the same thing. Now that we know there are a ton of loans using inflated volatile collateral on illiquid inflated assets, and this is a certified bad thing, but the coming death spiral of equity/asset sales isn't the only giant elephant in the room everyone is ignoring. I'm talking, of course, about Evergrande in specific, and Chinese property bonds in general. The list of Chinese real estate developers that aren't paying their employees, debts, bonds, or suppliers is actually longer than you pretend your wang is.
Got him!
So we'll just use Evergrande as a proxy for the whole lot of them. Evergrande hasn't made hundreds of millions of dollars of interest payments on bonds since September.
Why are you running? Why are you running?
A couple weeks ago, they failed to pay the principal payment on a maturing bond to the tune of $2.1 billion.
Nice.
So you think that means their debt is junk and they've defaulted, right? Not so fast. Let's check what the big three rating agencies have to say about it. Fitch, RD, restricted default. S&P, SD, selective default. Moody's, CAA1, rated as poor quality and very high credit risk. You notice what's missing from all of those? D, for default.
Okay.
Evergrande has missed everything they can possibly miss, and they're still not rated D. Hell, those brazen cockshuffers at Moody's actually have 4 separate ratings lower than what they're slapping on EG bonds. Here, let me take a second to speak in the meme language you smooth-brained tards actually might understand. The reason that none of these agencies will put the D on Evergrande bonds is twofold. One, they don't want to piss off the Chinese government.
Sorry, bro.
2. The bank and hedge funds that their primary clients are balls deep in this debt can't get off their books because, shockingly, people haven't forgotten how those same banks and hedge funds fucked, saddled, and rode them with garbage debt in 2008.
Yeah, boy.
Why is this relevant to U.S. housing, equities, and the margin loans financing the spiraling prices of both? Easy. The same people who hold the worthless Chinese debt also hold trillions of dollars of equities that they've taken margin loans against to buy trillions of dollars of U.S. housing. After Amazon's Q4 earnings, everyone who looked into them said, "Holy crap. The only thing holding up the earnings report is this 110 billion Rivian valuation." Some people even made memes about it on Reddit, pointing out that it was the only thing holding up the entire US market. Now, what happened when Amazon's Q1 ER came out and the Rivian valuation had dropped to more realistic levels? Right, a negative 189% miss on earnings in a huge bear run on SPY and QQQ. Quick shout out to those of you who like to play options on stock lockup expiries. Rivian's lockup ends on May 8th, and Amazon and F have a ton of shares with a cost basis of $10 they can sell on or after that date. The price is currently $30. You do the math on if they want to hold on to that garbage once they can dump it at a profit. That's a huge drop in collateral backing all that margin debt. Is it enough to cause the mother of all margin call and set off the worst crash since 1929?
2 hours later.
No, not yet. But it's coming. Remember how people pointed out on Amazon's last earnings report how they were actually super fucked? Yeah, you know who had a supposedly positive earnings report, but is actually super mega fucked and just lied through their teeth about it?
And his name is
Apple. Apple doesn't have a single factory working right now, and their by far number one market, China, is in the midst of complete economic collapse. The Politburo doesn't have emergency meetings about giant spending packages because things are going well. They give zero guidance on either of these things, which makes me think that it's even worse than I think it is. And I think it's fucking horrible. But back to the bad Chinese debt. The reason Wall Street can survive a hit to something like Amazon and the indexes is that they're hedged to the balls for stuff like that. Know what they're not hedged for? Chinese property bonds universally going to zero. So what happens when the collateral for those margin loans goes down? I'm sure you tards behind Wendy's have all heard this one before. You get a margin call. First, you, or more likely your broker, sells equities. But if equities are all dropping, they're coming for that money, and they're looking at your assets to get it. Guess what? Housing and commercial real estate are both assets that they can force sales on. So that same self-reinforcing spiral that drove up both equity and real estate prices, it's gonna go into reverse. But here's the thing. When everyone is selling at the same time, prices go down really fast. We learned this last time in 2008. This time, because the housing market is directly tied to crashing stocks instead of indirectly through people who will default over time as they lose their jobs or balloon payments come out due or rates adjust, it's going to happen all at once, faster and more violently. We actually got a brief preview of what this is going to look like thanks to the wild incompetence and greed at Zillow. Their stock crashed 40% in 5 days. When it was revealed they'd bought too many houses and they couldn't rent or flip and had to sell them at a loss.
Mission failed. We'll get them next time.
And that's just a couple of neighborhoods in Arizona. When this shit hits nationwide, it's going to be exponentially worse. How much worse? Well, that depends on where you are. Here's some graphs explaining that while the US is fucked, somehow our maple swilling neighbors to the north are exponentially worse off. Life lesson: don't tie yourself to China, kids. This is bad, but it's kind of hiding how bad it is because the data cuts off too soon after the COVID crash. Yeah, Canada. I'm sorry, Maples. It's gonna be rough. Good luck and care with RBC. Pretty sure that between a huge position in Chinese debt and an incredible number of soon-to-be bad mortgages and margin loans, they're completely worthless. Look, I started writing DDs last fall saying we just got into recession but nobody noticed, and everyone laughed at me and said I was crazy. After that Q1 GDP miss, it looks a bit different, yeah? Last summer, I wrote about how CMBS was fucked and it would start coming due in March 2022, and people pointed and laughed. See the chart earlier in this post. Now, I'm telling you that the banks, the Fed, and every fucking person has fucked up and missed that real estate and equities have gotten tied up in a Gordian knot that's getting sucked into a black hole of failure. Now, I'd like to be wrong. I've been wrong before. See my terrible takes on corporate hedging of HYG, for example, but I don't think I'm wrong here. The market, housing, and everything is going down like Anne Robbins trying to get off the Hollywood blacklist. I've never given dates before because I don't have a good enough idea of when things would finally hit critical mass. If we keep following the 2008 chart, thanks for being predictable algorithms, we're going to go up for a couple of weeks, then crash sometime between the end of May and the middle/end of July. Summer collapses are historically rather rare, so I like this fall myself, but I wouldn't be surprised by either outcome. TLDR, in 2008, the unknown weapons of financial mass destruction were subprime loans, MBS, CDs, and CDOs. In 2022, they're margin loans, asset-backed loans, Chinese bonds, and cash purchase assets. This is how inflation leaked into the real economy from the assets it was supposed to be segregated in. Fed printer goes burr, then leads into asset inflation, then leads into margin loans against assets drive up real estate, then owners of real estate suddenly have lots of extra money, which leads to inflation. As of November of 2021, the Fed had printed $13 trillion since the start of COVID. $1 trillion was stimmies. The rest went to the rich via inflated asset prices and debt purchases. Don't believe them when they try to blame this shit show on stimmies and the just now conveniently mentioned in the media return of the subprime loans a bit. They just want a chance to blame this on poor people and immigrants to avoid having anyone to look at them. And don't think J Powell's greedy ass can save you this time. To match the financial impact of what the Fed did during COVID, they'd have to print nearly $60 trillion. That's Weimar Republic territory if we're not already headed there already. Sources include, but not limited to, Fred, Statista, CoreLogic, and FINRA. Thank you for listening to today's SuperStonk reading. I just want to give a quick reminder to DRS your shares. Ape, don't fight ape. Don't fall to weekend FUD, and buckle up. Y'all have a good one. Till next time. See ya.